Hello and welcome to a longer talking business episode here today. And the reason it's longer is because it's full of so much useful, insightful, and motivational information. And that information comes from Umara, who used to be a student in my business class many, many moons ago. And I'm not going to talk anymore because believe me, everything you're going to be hearing in here is just stunning. So sit back, relax, enjoy. Here's Umara. Hello, everyone. Talking Business is back, and we've got extra special, extra super show for you today. We've got an ex-student of mine. We've got Umara. So, hello, Umara. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I've been waiting all week to be in this hot seat. Take that, Oprah.
Yeah, exactly. Who needs all that when you've got, Pardo's business? Here we go. This is game changing right here. So let's get stuck in, shall we? All that we know is that you used to study at the same college that I worked at. So who is Umara? If you had to explain who you are to somebody, who are you?
Depends what day you get me on. Sometimes I'm the most animated, sociable, extroverted person ever. Sometimes I'm just a sports aficionado obsessed with football. Sometimes I'm a fashionista. Sometimes I'm a candle enthusiast, and sometimes I just don't want to know you. But for the most part, I'm just a fun-loving, happy-go-lucky girl next door. Happy to speak to anybody, happy to support anyone in their time of need. And in lockdown, I've just been hit and miss, to be honest. I'm probably the happiest person you'll ever meet, but then the most introverted person as well. So it just goes to show I'm just a roller coaster.
It sounds like it. I might as well just throw this list of questions away and we'll just, completely wing it by the sounds of it. So you said introverted, but I'm sure people are going to watch this and go, really? So, maybe you'll try and explain that one to us a little bit as we go along here. But anyway, great to speak to you again. It's been around about 10 years, something like that, since you studied at JC. Is that right?
No, it hasn't been 10 years, Danny. Goodness me. It's been, I'll work it out for you. I studied at JC from 2012 to 2014. So that
9, we're getting there.
Almost 10. Oh my God. So you weren't far off.
Sorry about that. Honesty is always what we do. Okay, so 2012 to 2014. And what did you do at college? What did you study at college back in the day? Do you remember? It's going to be awkward if you don't. So.
Just about. So I studied business with you. So I did business, I did government and politics, and I studied media. So they were my 3 main A-levels there.
Okay. So when you did your A-levels, I got really some nice questions here from some students. One of them was, what was your goal at college? So when you were 16, 17, 18, where did you want to go from there? Did you have like a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, or were you just at college because that's like the next thing you do?
So I've said this before to half a dozen people already, but I was adamant. I was absolutely hell-bent. I was not going to go to university. Right. So my 5-year, 10-year, 15-year plan was, nope, I'm not going to go to uni. That's not even going to be in the pipeline. Okay. That's not even going to be a consideration. I wanted to walk the road less traveled, and I thought, maybe I'll get my foot in the door with an apprenticeship somewhere. Maybe the job prospects will be okay. I can work my way up in a company somewhere. That didn't happen. So my plan was actually in the foreseeable future, in the next 5 to 10 years, I'll probably get my foot in the career ladder and work my way up in a company, probably start my business soon enough. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I still do to a certain extent. But again, it's just a case of the right timing and finding a niche and something that you like. So if you asked me in college, when I was saying, I'm not going to go to university, people would always ask, so what do you want to do then? Uni's like the only option. Yeah. But for me, it wasn't a case of going to uni to just do something half-assed and not because someone's telling you, as opposed to you wanting to do it. So, I mean, my long-term plan was not to go to uni and to do something that I can kind of carve out my own path and work out my own identity in the process. So that's what I would have told you when I was finishing college. But then what actually happened?
Well, spoiler alert. Yeah. I hate to, here we go. So the 5-year plan, 10-year plan, start your own business, entrepreneur, no university. Okay, cool. Yeah. So what actually happened?
So let's take it from my gap year. Finished JC, 1st September after college. Everyone else is kind of winding out at university, freshers week. And I'm stuck at home thinking, hang on, this isn't what I thought I'd be doing. I thought I would have had, an acceptance from an apprenticeship somewhere. I was applying for the Big Four, I was applying for KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, you name it.
Yeah.
I was applying. Every single application was a rejection.
Yeah.
And not on the grounds of you're not experienced enough, not on the grounds of you haven't done enough work experience, because I had plenty of that. It was just pot luck. I didn't get to where I wanted to be. So I ended up working dead-end jobs in retail for a few months. And then the January the following year, so this is still my gap year now, I had a decision to make. It was a case of stay in retail or apply to university on the off chance I find something I actually want to do, which was a bit of a risk for me because despite my best efforts, I went to extreme lengths not to go to uni, but it turns out I had to apply anyway because I didn't find anything that my heart was in. So at that point in time, January 2015, this is, I had just started a part-time job at Selfridges, which was really glitzy and glamorous, and I absolutely loved it. But I knew that doing that in a full-time capacity was not something I'd want to do. So essentially, whilst I was banging out the full-time shifts at Selfridges, I was applying for uni in the background, and I came across a course called PPE, which is kind of in line with the sorts of A-levels that I had from JC, and very much intertwined with my interests and my keenness to learn about politics, economics, all things social policy. So it kind of merged everything that I'm interested in all together into one course. So of course I picked up the phone, called the course leader, and he basically said, we haven't been running this program for very long. It's in its infancy. We've only had 1 year's worth of students to go by. You would be part of the second year fleet. Would you be interested to come in for an open day? And then the rest is history. I went 2 months later to UOB for an open evening for PPE, and I signed myself up, and it sounded like the right thing to do at the time. Yeah. And there went my inhibitions about university and all the reservations I had.
Yeah. What's PPE stand for people who don't know?
Social policy, politics and economics. So typically, I think it's philosophy, politics and economics. But this strand of PPE that's exclusive to University of Birmingham, they actually replaced the philosophy with social policy to make it a bit more accessible to people, because philosophy usually goes over people's heads. People are bored out of their brains with it. So they wanted to make it a bit more modern, a bit more contemporary, and less associated with the typical connotations of it being an Oxbridge degree. So they're trying to open itself up to so many more people who wouldn't otherwise go for it.
Yeah. Why did you take a gap year?
Or what, it wasn't meant to be a gap.
Actually, two parts of it. So one, why did you take a gap year? And two, what were you expecting to get out of it that you maybe didn't? And is there anything that you maybe would have done differently on that?
Yeah, so just to backtrack, it wasn't actually supposed to be a gap year. It was meant to be indefinitely, not going to uni, figuring it out on my own.
You call it a gap year now because it was a gap year, but at that point it was, I'm just not going. A gap lifetime.
So now I'm like, so now I tried to play it off as, oh, that was always in the plan. I just wanted to find myself for a year and go traveling. You know how it is. Oh. But that's not actually what happened. So initially, remember, my thought process was, I'm not going to go to university. It doesn't suit the type of person I am. I couldn't even put my finger on what I wanted to do, let alone plug myself into something that, doesn't really appeal to me. So my plan for the gap year was go through various motions with job applications, suddenly find something somewhere and hopefully stick it out. Hopefully I like it enough. So that didn't happen. So I was in and out of different retail jobs. Eventually I ended up at Selfridges January the following year, stuck that out full time because I really liked it there. But what made me then go for university as opposed to sticking out in the gap year was a confluence of a few factors, really. It was my parents, who are super well educated, my mum's side and my dad's side, both degree educated, professional jobs. And I didn't want to stick out like a sore thumb, because the precedent in our family was, as the eldest grandchild on one side of my family, mind you, the precedent was everybody's going to go to uni, get a formal education, get that degree, and then do well for themselves. And what I had done essentially is started a bit of a precedent, which is a bit dangerous for my family, which is, oh, the eldest grandchild, Umara's not going to go to university. What are the others going to do? Yeah. And so it was a bit of peer pressure, but not so much peer pressure because the decision was ultimately mine. Yeah. But I think it was always because I found myself in a place where I hadn't really accomplished much at such a young age. And everyone was kind of telling me, this isn't it for you. There's more to life than retail jobs. You're always going to find retail, even if all else failed. That's always going to be waiting for you. Get an education. So it was that kind of mentality that kind of sunk in and embedded itself into my brain. And I thought, hang on a minute, what if it is just retail and there's nothing else? What if I've fallen into a trap? And it was those sorts of conversations that really stuck with me and haunted me on some nights. And I thought, no, I'm waking up for work every day, slogging away at a job that I can't see myself doing for the rest of my life. So the alternative was.
And that's a really interesting point, because some people would love to get stuck in a retail job. You know, there's people with a lot of passion for that, and they would have loved to have done that and work their way up, and they're really interested. And obviously that landscape has changed a lot in the last 12 months, hasn't it? But it's really interesting that for you, just like, no. But you're a people person. I mean, or you know, it appears you're a people person. Is that not the job for you then? You know, chatting to people and talking about things like that?
I mean, you could say it's quite a twisted mentality, really. But the way I thought was, if you're not going to become a doctor, not going to become a professor, not going to become a dentist, not going to do the traditional vocational courses which land you into a specific job, university isn't economically viable. I thought traditionally, I mean, if you look at my socioeconomics, I don't come from the wealthiest of families. I grew up in inner city Birmingham, not an affluent area by any stretch. And I thought, I'd probably be really up against it. If I take on £9,000 a year debt on a 3-year course, take out loans upon loans, because obviously I can't afford subsistence throughout uni. So that's my only way of getting by. I thought, how am I gonna make ends meet if ultimately I end up in a job that I'm not gonna like or take to very kindly, or worst case scenario, do a degree, and like so many other graduates out there, with first class honours, with master's degrees, even with PhDs, struggle to get into the labour market, especially around that time. I mean, it wasn't in the midst of the financial crisis, it was just off the back end of that. But I couldn't fathom the thought of, because I saw so many people, so many of my friends who were older than me, go through the cycle that is further education, come out the back end, and they didn't have a job waiting for them. And that ultimately stunned me, because they were the most hardest working people I knew, and they struggled to get onto the career ladder, and that's what really scared me. But despite all that, despite the scare stories, I put myself forward for that course, PPE, and then I did it, enjoyed it luckily, and I did manage to find a job having done that. But again, it was just the way I was thinking at that time. I don't want to become a doctor, don't want to go into nursing, don't want to be a paramedic, don't want to do the sciences. Because everybody kept telling me the A levels you did weren't academically rigorous. You did business, you did media, you did politics. What are you going to do with that? Where was chemistry? Where was biology?
Chemistry, exactly. Yeah. No, I've had that discussion with many students when they sign up to courses, and they've got these same trepidations about that. And it's really interesting you mentioned that a job you didn't like, because a lot of people I speak to, they always say, you know, in terms of advice, get a job you love, do something you really like. And it sounds so cheesy. You're like, oh, you know, here we go again, I'm being told again. But you're another person who's like, I didn't like that job, I didn't want to do it for the next 40 years. You know, it's just it seems such a simple concept. And we'll come back to that in a little bit, actually, about your work and things. But so what did you achieve in your degree? What grade did you get? And how on earth do you get a grade like that? What did you have to do to get that grade?
Not bad for someone who didn't want to go to uni, eh? That's everyone keeps throwing that in my face. Oh, Umara, the same girl who didn't want to go to university. Didn't we tell you were going to do well? But then what I will say is that's not the end of it. I did get a first class honours. How I did that, it was just being the most hardworking university student. But that came at the expense of, I mean, in hindsight, what I would say is I took university very seriously, and to the end that I didn't actually enjoy the social aspect. I didn't really partake in societies. I didn't do all that much by extracurricular. I didn't soak up the sights and sounds that any typical University of Birmingham student would do. I didn't tap into its offerings. I didn't really socialise outside of my own discipline or outside of the course of study that I was doing. So it really did come at the detriment of all those other things that you would associate with a university experience. But for me, I just threw myself in head first. I was also balancing a challenging part-time job at Selfridges. At that point, I'd transferred my contract from full-time to weekend, so I still had something throughout uni. So Saturday, Sunday were all working full-time at Selfridges, and then Monday to Friday, it meant I had to pack my calendar that much more to get my work done. So I think it's that actual insight into, oh my God, I need to get my work done within Monday to Friday in order to do my part-time job on a Saturday, Sunday, that got me thinking I need to work 10 times harder because I'm juggling 2 things here, which meant that I didn't do anything else. I mean, I love my sport. I didn't give up my sport or my TV shows or my fitness, because that's all things that I like. But in terms of social activities, I didn't really soak up the sights and sounds of the university as much.
Yeah.
I'd go to uni, come back, because luckily I drove, so I passed my driving test quite early, so I didn't have to catch like public transport or anything. So I'd get in my car, park up at uni, go to my lectures, go to my seminars, come back home, and then do my studying. It was a very lonely existence, but that's the kind of thing that I chose for myself.
Yeah.
I just thought I just want to take my degree seriously. Everybody told me, it's going to be hard to come by. You're not going to get the experience again. So that was my line of thinking. But looking back, the advice I'd give to people is make sure you enjoy your university experience. It's so short-lived. It flies by.
Yeah.
An hour here or there just to kind of take part in a society or get to know other people or join networking events is not going to cost you in the long run. So definitely do that kind of thing, because I didn't, and I have come to regret it now.
Yeah, nice advice. I mean, you mentioned there as well, sport. And, I like a bit of sport, pretty much just American football, really. But, you are a sport aficionado. You seem to know, I was going to say a bit about everything then, but I'm changing it in my head too. You seem to know a lot about everything. So what does sport do for you then? I mean, you seem to, your knowledge and your passion for it spreads across a variety of sports. Why and what does that do for you and your fitness and all those things you're interested in? What's the point?
It's always been my outlet, and it's always been my form of escapism. I mean, growing up, PE was my favorite lesson at school. I always had a good thing going with my PE teachers. I took that straight to college and university. I was always part of different gyms at the same time. I used to do MMA and Muay Thai. That's a very key sport of mine in terms of actually doing it. So around college time, I came into contact with a local Muay Thai instructor, and he basically started training me. And ever since then, I have been absolutely enamored by MMA. That was my entry point into mixed martial arts and Thai boxing. Football, cricket, rugby, tennis, NBA, I've grown up on. I've always had the Sky Sports channels in the house. Traditionally, like other households within my family have always had, say, Sky News as the default channel or BBC One. For us, it was always Sky Sports News or Sky Sports One, and now it's like BT Sport. It's always on in the background. And I think I owe that to the kind of environment I was brought up in. So I'm the eldest child. I've got a younger brother who's 22 now, but we're basically the eldest children. And my dad did an awful lot with us growing up to get us into sports. He'd take us to football on the weekends. He'd make sure we've grown up on it. We can try out different sports, the ones that we enjoy. It really got me into that. So I think it's a combination of factors, kind of self-taught, because I kind of YouTubed the hell out of it when I was growing up, watched whatever I could get my hands on, and tried out loads of activities in school. So it's that. But it's also the fact that I always had that screen that my dad was watching in the background. It was always a football, always a cricket, always asking him questions. How do the overs work in cricket? How do the innings work? Why are the numbers going up so quickly?
You'd have to explain that to me, to be fair.
Yeah. And then, I mean, over time, I've just added so many more. Like, I was never an NBA fan growing up. And all of a sudden, I'm an NBA fan. Like, it's just happened in the past few years. I just like to get stuck into different sports. It does ever so much for me. And it's not just the celebrity that's associated with it. People get too embroiled in the athletes these days and what they're doing and who they're sponsored by. It's the pure form of the game. So it's actually the sports that I'm enamored by, because I love to see athletes who have like gone from rags to riches almost, and sport has been their way out of loads of desolate times and hardships. And I just think that's the life-changing angle of sport, and people don't really see that. Might not have happened for me because I never pushed myself in terms of sport that way, but it happens for so many people, and it's just lovely to see. It's so inspiring.
That's brilliant. And isn't it great that we've got access to that? But you can say, I want to watch this. I mean, you can watch it for hours and hours and hours on YouTube, but in terms of having a personal interest in something, it's so important, I find, to mental health and things like that. So, how important is like the keeping fit and the physical activity to your mental health? Have you ever struggled with mental health, if you don't mind me asking? And what's the situation with that? Has the physical side of things helped you to get out of those situations? You said earlier you were introverted, and again, I guarantee you nobody's watching this going, yeah, she's really introverted. So is that part of it as well? How does that all work?
I have a very difficult time explaining that to people. It's like oxymoronic, isn't it? I come across as somebody who's so extroverted, somewhat confident, likes to have a bit of a chinwag, but at the same time, I know in my heart of hearts, it's something that I can do and it comes easily to me. But sometimes it's not always something that I want to do, or it's not always the most engaging thing for me or the right thing for me sometimes. So I've chosen to do this, say, because I've really wanted to do it for a very long time. But I mean, quite possibly, if it was a few months ago when I was having a really bad spell with my mental health, I probably wouldn't have offered to do this. It would have been something that's not possible for me. I would have logged out after a long day and thought, that's it. Bye bye world. Don't want to see anybody else. Don't want to speak to anyone. And that's not just come about off the back of lockdown like it has for a lot of people. I've struggled with it throughout. So I had a few bouts of bad mental health back at university. I actually didn't struggle with my university at all in terms of my course and the academic side. It was more a case of perhaps the way that I approached it. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I'm absolutely my own worst enemy sometimes. So I've got perfectionist tendencies and OCD tendencies. So if something didn't quite go right in an assignment or with an exam or a presentation that I had coming up, I'd really give myself a hard time and not let myself enjoy. You know, if I was always going back to something that went wrong or something that I could have perhaps done better. And in terms of that, my OCD traits and my perfectionist tendencies, they always came in the way of my fulfillment and enjoyment of other things. And that's, I suppose, where sport came in to drown out that background noise, to tell me that, no, it's fine, just watch the football and forget about it. That kind of helped me because it came at the expense of real human conversations, and it stopped me from having to talk to somebody about how I was feeling. So sport would kind of fill that void for me. So that's how I've managed my mental health, and the fitness, it's literally got me out of the darkest of days. So like I said, I started training Thai boxing a few years ago when I was at college, met an instructor, did it daily for about a couple of months. So Monday to Friday, would do 1 hour session with him. It kept me from going insane at some points because I could feel it. It was like a melting pot. And every day was becoming more difficult for me at university. Sometimes I'd feel like I was doing it to myself. I wasn't socializing enough, wasn't seeing friends, didn't know how to cope with it. Would go straight to the gym, do a bit of sparring, do a bit of boxing, and it would literally make me feel like I was on top of the world. But at the same time, I have come to realize that that was also bad because, I mean, as much as you can do that and there's an outlet for it, you've still got to come home and address the issues that you've got going on. And as much as I wanted to escape it, I would burn out of sweat in the boxing gym or in my own gym or home gym, whatever. I created all these little homes for myself to escape whatever was going on in my head. But ultimately, I couldn't escape it. So, I mean, it's really difficult and I'm still battling it. I mean, it's not something that's been born out of stress or an event in my life or a trauma that I've suffered. It's just something that I'm dealing with and on an ongoing basis. And I wouldn't say lockdown has exacerbated it either. It's just something that I've always had to deal with in the background. So it's quite interesting for me because you'll speak to some students, Danny, and they might say, actually, I felt it coming on a bit more in lockdown. I didn't know I had mental health issues and it's all getting a bit much for me. And I've actually had probably the best time with my mental health over lockdown, which is unusual because you'd think now would be the time to suffer from a mental health issue.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't get the media coverage, does it? But some people are actually quite enjoying, you know, the working from home, learning from home. I've spoke to some students and they said, no, we quite like this. You know, I'm setting my own timetables, I'm doing my own thing. I'm getting the content that I want to with the people I want to. You know, you're only having to see the people or speak to the people you want to. So no, you're right on that, but I don't think that gets any coverage really from what I've seen.
No, it doesn't. I mean, at the university and in the workplaces that I worked at, it became such a buzzword, well-being and mental health, and they had weeks and weeks dedicated to it. But I think sometimes it's just become so corporatized and hijacked by a whole wave of, we're doing so much for mental health now. We've got helplines and confidential hubs that people can go and visit and speak to people on. But the signs are not visible. So when you're out on the street, you can't really say, oh, that girl looks like she's suffering from mental health issues, because it's almost something that you can't see. So unless you've detected it in somebody because of some kind of behavior or characteristic that they've got, or unless someone approaches you and says, I need help, which the vast majority of people don't do, you can't really plug in to the signs of mental health and help where you think you might be able to. You can do all these conferences and webinars and try to target the general population of students and alumni and staff members, but it's not always targeted. And I think as much as other people can come in and help you, you've got to be able to take the steps yourself and willing to help yourself as well.
Yeah, and
So
that's
a
often
lot
the
of it
most
comes from
difficult
that.
part. Yeah, that's often the most difficult part, isn't it? In terms of saying,
Yeah.
I need to do something about me, for me. I'm speaking from personal experience here. It is really tricky to kind of look yourself in the mirror and then choose to make changes and choose to make a difference, and choose to do the things that will kind of help you out on that. I mean, you're, as you said, 9 years away from being at college. Mental health isn't, I presume, anyway, for me, it isn't, one steady kind of, this is what it's like all the time. How would you describe that? Is it a roller coaster? And, how are you still kind of going on that roller coaster?
I'm still on it. It's still going.
Same.
I'm waiting for it to stop. But I mean, no, I don't think it's ever going to stop, to be honest with you, because even when you feel you're most positive on some days, you're like, oh, I think I've overcome it. Nothing can stop me now. And it's just little things that might happen in your day to day. You might get the feedback that you weren't looking for from your manager at work. A family member might rub you up the wrong way. Football team might not get the scoreline that you were wishing for. Yeah. Little things like that, as trivial or as serious as those things might be on a spectrum, the tiniest things can push you over the edge, and when you expect it least. So it's not like you can feel it coming, but it's about preparing yourself and having coping mechanisms in place. And my coping mechanisms weren't always the healthiest. So I say I'd plug myself into sport or a TV show or the gym, but again, it wasn't always the best way of helping me, and I have gotten better with that. So riding the wave of that roller coaster at certain points, at certain pinch points, in the peaks and troughs, I will say, actually, I'm having a bad day. I want to speak to a friend. I want to speak to a colleague. I want to speak to somebody that I trust. And I've started doing that a lot more now. Before it was a case of, I'm Umara, I can't ask for help. It's a bit of, like the whole, no, but I'm the person everybody comes to. I've got everything together. I've got my ducks in a row. I'm that person people confide in. I can't be the person asking for help. It was more that thing. And no one was putting that expectation or pressure on me. It was more me affirming to myself, it's all a mental thing. You've got to be the shoulder for everyone else to cry on, but you can't cry on anyone else's shoulder. Not that I've needed a good cry, because I don't think I need a good cry. But I might end up crying after this. You just never know.
But, with the excitement that, I did it. Oh, that's it. I'm famous. I've made it. But I mean, mental, our students, I've spoke to a few of them about it, and it's almost like they're told, well, if you do these things, then you will be fine. And, it's not one size fits all. The advice that you're giving, the advice that I'm giving, we're not therapists or counselors. It really is such an individual thing that I think, like you were saying, the corporatization of it all, the ability to say, well, we're going to do this and it'll solve everybody's problems. But, well, no, not really. But it really is such an individual thing. And you're saying, the things that have worked for you, great, might not work at all for me. So, you've got to be really careful with those, haven't you? So, but nice one for keeping on, rocking and rolling with it. It's a real tricky one. And I think as well, you were talking about you can't tell people have it. Again, if you were to watch this video back and you look at us two and you say, oh yeah, she's got mental health challenges, you wouldn't necessarily do that, would you?
No, you wouldn't. I mean, I've had plenty of help along the way. Like I said, I've recently started a new job. But in my previous role, I'm sure we'll come on to that. In my previous role, I was very much affected by mental health issues that were brought on as a result of the job itself. I found myself in a place where I wasn't enjoying work. I felt like I wasn't fulfilling my potential. I hit a glass ceiling. There wasn't any sort of career progression for me. And I didn't really feel like I was being stretched and challenged. And because of the monotony of the day job, I genuinely felt like I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to get out of it, to find a better job, to make moves career-wise. And because that wasn't happening for me, I was in this vicious cycle of just feeling really bad for myself. Rejection after rejection with job applications wasn't helping that. Trying to speak to my line manager at work, but with no sort of positivity in sight. I still had to do the job. The job wasn't going to change. They tried to make it easier for me, but I wasn't getting anywhere with it. So even though those lines of communication were open to me via my line manager and the whole well-being thing that they had, at the end of the day, only I had to get myself out of the situation. I knew that job wasn't fulfilling me. It's quite a toxic work culture. I had to make moves to try and get myself out of there, regardless of what anybody else said, because everybody I went to in the workplace would say, yeah, but unfortunately, we understand what you're going through, but the demands of the business are still there. You're going to need to do the job. You're going to need to put the shift in, which is fine, because again, that's what I was being paid to do. But because they weren't willing to kind of help me develop where I wanted to be, they were kind of pigeonholing me into a place that wasn't good for me. That wasn't conducive to helping me on my mental health journey. But on the back end of that, now that I'm out of that job that I didn't like and I'm in a better position, I'm much happier, I've settled into my new role, I've found that there's been drastic changes in my behavior and my mental health already. So sometimes it's certain things that are going on in your life that you wouldn't already know. I didn't know. I knew that I didn't like my job, but I didn't know it was taking a toll on me mentally. There's a difference there.
You couldn't kind of separate yourself from it. You know, it was just like,
it.
This is what's happening, this is who I am, rather than stepping back and going, oh, that's the cause.
Yeah, precisely. So like I said, it's still a journey. I mean, anything can knock you at any given point, but it's just about trying to understand how to help mitigate the impact of a bad mental health day. And it is okay to let people know that you're not doing well, because I wasn't. I know it sounds like a cliche. It's okay not to be okay, but it genuinely is. There's no shame in it. For all you know, there's more people suffering than are not. So it's really important.
Yeah, without a doubt, you know, when you start speaking about it and other people say, oh, well, I do this, I do that, I'm taking this medication. And then, you know, it's a really massive thing, isn't it? You're talking about the job that you're actually really enjoying now. I mean, the theory is, I thought that you were supposed to go to university and then you come out and then you immediately land the job that you've been wanting all your life, and you're a manager or you're doing this and that. So you're kind of proving that wrong a little bit. I can see your head shaking there. So this is going to get awkward. So that doesn't happen then. Or it didn't happen to you. You know, it hasn't happened to anybody I've actually spoke to yet. So I'm still looking for that one person it's actually happened to.
It hasn't happened to anybody that I know, and I know a lot of people, Danny. Now, the only caveat to that is, like I said before, and I know it sounds silly and it sounds very elitist, but my friends that studied medicine, my friends that studied dentistry, my friends that studied something that lands you in a vocation, be it law, be it engineering, be it something like that, I'm happy to say that they found their path quite easily. They slipped into what they wanted to do quite easily, graduated, already had something waiting for them. Unfortunately, for other people who do, say, humanities subjects or the creative arts or other sorts of things, it's not as easy, because it's not a linear career path. You'll find yourself jumping around in various different industries, various different sectors, trying to find your way around at the very beginning. So for instance, I graduated in 2018. A couple of months later, landed in an insurance company, which was the last job that I was talking about. That insurance and financial services provider, I didn't know what the hell it was before uni. I just found a job opening, applied for it, got in, pretended like I was passionate about insurance and financial services. I didn't know anything about it, in all honesty, but I just sold myself enough to get the job. Started that 2 months after graduated, and it seemed like a good enough job to me at first. I thought, well, I'm grateful to have got something. And you're always taught to be grateful, not to be complaining about a job, even if you've got one. So every time I kind of had a few hiccups and a few grievances about the job, I just thought, no, there's so many people who haven't got a job, so I can't complain about mine. So I was kind of suppressing all that. There were a few murmurs in the background that I wasn't actually liking it, but I tried to ignore it. And I just thought, well, as a graduate, I'm an early entrant. What do I know about work? Let me just stick it out. So I found myself in a job that's not very neatly aligned to my course, because you'd think PPE, probably going to go into local government, council work, civil servant, that sort of thing. That didn't actually work out in terms of my career trajectory. I just ended up working in finance, like I said. But navigating that space about, I've actually majored in economics or humanities or whatever, and going into a place of work where you're surrounded by people who have studied the stock market, who have studied investment banking, who have got PhDs and masters and everything maths and actuarial related. And you find yourself there with a bit of imposter syndrome, thinking, how did I get this job? Because everybody around me comes from a very specific background, like elitist universities, Oxbridge educated, predominantly male, predominantly white. It was quite difficult for me to navigate that space, because it always is going to be difficult in financial services, isn't it? Especially as a woman in there. So it was a massive, huge learning curve for me. But again, I got a lot from it. For all of the negatives, I did learn a lot. It just wasn't the place for me to develop and to prosper in terms of my career journey. But I just say to anybody watching this, don't expect the first place that you land to be the place to nurture you, and it won't be your job for life for the vast majority of us. Like I said, if you're going to go on to do nursing, dentistry, become a doctor, fair enough. You'll probably end up doing the same thing for the rest of your life because you're happy to do that. But for any other subject that doesn't land you in a specific job or a career, don't be afraid to move around if you need to. So I know there's a general rule of thumb, stick it out for 2 years and then move on, so you don't have too many gaps or too much jumping around in your CV. So generally speaking, that's what I've done. I've stayed there for about 2 years, started my new job in January. That was around the 2.5-year mark. And now I find myself somewhere else, which is neatly aligned to the degree that I did. And it is actually stretching me in ways that I wanted a career to. So it does work out in the end. Yeah. You've just got to be patient.
Yeah, so what are you doing now that you enjoy so much? And also, I'm going to come back to something you said there in a few minutes with regards to white males being, in charge and the stereotypes of that. And also, you said being stretched and challenged at work. So what are you doing now then, and why are you enjoying it so much?
So I actually work in the civil service now. I think for NDA reasons, I'm not allowed to say where I'm working and what I'm doing. But in terms of that, just to give you a vague idea, I'm a project manager. So I'm working towards my qualifications to become a project manager, working with different programs, different projects within that department of the civil service. And the reason that I like it here is I kind of have ownership to steer my own learning and development. So as soon as I landed in the job, they said, we've got a couple of projects. We like your experience. We know that you're quite capable in the world of project management. Take your pick. Which project do you think you want to do? Because we've got so many openings at the moment. They did a bulk recruitment at the time. They said, you're the first one through the door. Take your pick. Which one takes your fancy? And then it all took off from there. So I had about 8 or 9 projects laid out for me neatly, and they were like, which one would you want to do? And tell us about your reasons. How can we mold it to suit you a bit more? And what sort of things are you looking to get out of this role? Let's try and plug you in. There's learning and development courses in the next few months, all happening virtually. Some external providers are providing them, some are being done internally. Let us help you to sign yourself up for them. If there's any gaps in your sort of field of expertise, we'd want to plug them in as early as your first few months. Don't be shy, just let us know, have this career conversation early. It's never too early to have these conversations. And I was completely blown away because I came from a role where you did what you were told. Yeah. If something came up in terms of a conference or, a webinar, you'd have to fight for half an hour or an hour of your time to be taken out of the workplace to go and do it. Yeah. And then you'd have to give a business case and you'd have to go through layers of bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And it was just an absolute nightmare, as you'd expect in financial services.
Yeah. You're destroying a few. Yeah, you're destroying a few stereotypes here as well, because you're saying things like stretching yourself, challenging yourself, learning, developing. Because I do all the cheesy stuff that you'll be learning all your life, and the students go, "Oh no, he's off on one again." But thank you for backing me up. But also, wouldn't it be easier to just get a job that pays well? You don't have to do much. You don't have a responsibility. Because that is also what I hear a lot. That I just want to earn money and not have to do much. But you're throwing that, really to the curb. So what's that all about? Why not the easy route?
I mean, we're young enough to make mistakes. That's always been my mantra. So I'm in my mid-20s now. I'm 25. But when you're finishing college, when you're finishing uni, you're in your early 20s, and that is the time to honestly pull your socks off and do what you can in terms of the professional sphere. Do as many courses and qualifications as you can. Learning will never stop, like as you well have said. But I mean, developing yourself in an area that you want to specialize in when you find that is very important. So you see it on Twitter and social media all the time. Work hard in your 20s so you set yourself up nicely in your 30s and your 40s. And people kind of create those timelines almost, kind of subconsciously, not knowing that it doesn't always work out like that. But for me in particular, what I found really instrumental to my growth and my development is opening myself up to a wealth of opportunity. So whenever these opportunities land on my desk or new projects come to my desk, I will not turn them away. I will find a way to take on exciting projects or things that I feel like I haven't done before. Because when you're young and you don't have as many responsibilities, especially as a woman, I think it's really important, even more important, to kind of kickstart your career as early as you can. So I mean, if you come out of uni, start a new job, don't really know what you want to do, find yourself firmly planted in a job that you don't really know what you want to get out of. If you've got a half decent line manager in any sort of company, they will really help you to get to where you want to be. But they will ask the hard questions. What do you want to do to get yourself to where you want to be? I can only help you so much. So you kind of need to create a roadmap almost, just like Boris has done to get out of lockdown. You have to create a career roadmap and say, where do you want to be in the next few months? What do you need to do to get there? How can we as a company help you? And when you think like that, I mean, if you don't ask, you don't get. Because I used to think, I'm waiting for someone to tell me, this sounds like a good idea. Do you want to do it? I didn't really know what was the obvious natural step to my progression. But now that I'm thinking more in terms of, okay, I find myself in a particular strand, I landed in project management, it sort of stuck with me, I quite enjoy it. There's certain qualifications as the natural trajectory and order of project management. If I get those under my belt, what will that do for me? And I can see how that trajectory is going to go in the next few years. And I can kind of pitch that to my new line manager now and say, this is what I carried over from my previous job. These are the gaps. This is the order of things that I want to continue on. It's a bit of a journey for me. And there's enough of a business case because I'm a project manager in this role as well. Are you happy for me to continue? And like I said, my current line manager is over the moon that I'm bringing things to him to say, can I do that? These are the dates. Can you make sure there are arrangements to cover me while I'm away at a course or a conference? And they're more than happy to sign it off. But you've just got to have a clear picture of what you want to do. And as early as my first year after uni, Danny, I had no idea. This is by no means you're going to have your life figured out as early as the first year post-graduation, because you're not. You figure it out along the way based on different.
And there's a lot of pressure, isn't it? You know, we put it on right from year 9. What are your options? Well, I don't really want to know what I want to do for the rest of my life. Okay, so you get to GCSEs, and then you've got to choose again what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And then you finish what you're going to do for the rest of your life. You're like, oh my gosh, just let me breathe a little bit. But how great is it that you are kind of finding that balance between contributing to the business because they pay your wages, but also, pushing yourself forward and driving yourself forward and developing yourself, which is obviously helping you as well. You mentioned a couple of times things like being a woman. So, it's hard to turn the telly on and not see racism, to see sexism in all kinds of fields. We look at the gender pay gap, you can look at sport, you can look at FTSE 100 companies, and, these things are still around. And it's a bit tricky for me because I am the old white guy, so, I don't see it from the perspective that my students do. So, has that been something that have you had to work harder for it? Do you see it? Have you seen it? And are you like constantly conscious about that?
I always have been, and putting career on one side for the minute, growing up, it was always something that kept being pushed on me by friends, family. I was always constantly being told, you're a girl, so you can't always be so interested in sports all the time. You can't always be seen to be in and out of a gym that's populated by loads of muscly old men doing boxing, because I'm a woman, a young woman, going into a gym that's completely packed out with men who are also on various MMA and boxing courses. But as not just a woman, but a woman of colour and of Asian heritage and Asian descent, it was always something I struggled with. So as early as in my college days, in college, I would comment on the match the night before or a football game or something like that, and all the boys around me would be like, what do you know? What's the blood type of Pep Guardiola's nephew? And I'd be like, for God's sake, girls can be interested in sport. And then they'd quiz me. When was the last time Sir Alex Ferguson won an away game in, I don't know, against Everton or something?
Meanwhile, they're having to search the answer themselves.
Exactly. And they were always, honestly, I don't know if it was something, there's a lot to be said about the demographic of the college I went to as well. But they weren't used to girls being interested in sport. So I was a token girl, waving the flag for sport, saying, I do Thai boxing on the weekends. And they were like, you don't do boxing. What's Thai boxing then? Tell us about it. I was like, do you want me to knock you out?
You could take them.
So that was my first sort of thing, because you see it on the news all the time where female pundits or commentators are getting it in the neck on social media, and they say one thing and it gets blown out of proportion and misconstrued. I found that was happening for me throughout college and school. Being a girl, interested in sport, interested in things that are traditionally associated with boys, gaming, the new FIFA game, NBA, sports, athleisure. I was always interested in trainers, you know, a sort of tomboy, even though I hate that term. But it was always blatantly made obvious to me that, I mean, some people would say you're just trying to fit in with boys, you're trying to get a bit of attention. And it was always something I was made super aware of, because I thought, hang on a minute, people are thinking I'm doing this for publicity or doing it for the wrong reasons. They don't understand that I'm actually someone with a passion for sport. I'm not trying to get anyone's attention or impress a boy, but it was always something I was battling with. Yeah, exactly. And it was so difficult. People were like really bothering me, even at college and at uni. You're obviously an adult well, getting there anyway.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, it was funny when we were in primary school, but come on, like it's not an act. It's something that I'm constantly interested in. And then even when I think I joined Twitter about 10 years ago, people were like, give it a rest, go back to the kitchen. What do you know, silly Asian woman? You know, racist slurs, sexist comments. And it was like, it was a whole minefield for me on social media. And I didn't even respond to it. I just thought, live and let live. They can say what they want, don't want to entertain it. And then came the career things later on. So, of course, uni was absolutely fine, even though university was predominantly male, pale and stale, as I like to call it. So PPE, traditionally an Oxbridge subject, was opened up to University of Birmingham as a red brick uni. When they started it off, I think it was 70-30, the ratio of boys to girls on the course. And then particularly so for my year, I think it was 80-20, and I was the only person of colour studying PPE at university that year. But what I will say is they were quite liberal in terms of their ways of thinking. They were from really posh areas, from Hertfordshire and Cornwall and Kent and you name it. They came from the most privileged areas, but they didn't really see colour, the students, and that's what I liked about them. So I wasn't made to feel like, oh, this other person is bringing otherness into the course. It wasn't like that. I think I was always quick to strike a conversation about rugby or gaming or something that they were interested in. So I kind of got away with it. Had I not shared the same interests as them, I think I would have felt it a bit more. But again, that's another example of being around unfamiliar territory, you know, being around people who weren't raised the way you were, different socioeconomics, spoke really well, had a wealth of work experience, got internships at all big FTSE 100 companies abroad and in London. They were well established, good networks, that sort of thing. So I kind of felt up against it when it came to things like placements, when they already had their work cut out for them, and I was still kind of, you know what it's like, Danny, when you're surrounded by people who just know what they're doing. So there's that. And then coming back to the whole sexism in the workplace, yes, in my last job, so the financial services company, I kind of felt like a diversity hire. I probably wasn't. I don't have that confirmation. But looking around, I came into a company completely white. And when I say completely white, 100% white. I worked in a division called the risk division. And the entirety of my company, I'd say, bar the IT professionals, who are usually mostly Indian and Gujarati Indian, everybody else in terms of bankers, insurers, actuaries, that sort of thing, they were all white. And then in my division where I worked in information security and data protection, all white, and they were all privileged. They all lived in like rural communities embedded into the neighboring areas of the city where we worked. And it was just really difficult to kind of cement myself and carve out a place for myself in that team, because everybody was all about going for a drink on a night out on a Friday night, or, you know, everything revolved around pubs and alcohol. And of course, as a Muslim girl, they weren't really going to accommodate me. They were like, oh, you can come along, we'll get you an orange juice, but it's not the sort of environment I wanted to be around. So that was always so challenging. So I could go on, I mean, at the risk of making this 3-hour video, I honestly could go on with the examples of different things that I've had to kind of navigate. But again, in between the whole being Muslim, being a woman, being a person of colour, being somebody who's interested in sports, you name it, I've been hit in one direction or the other. And in this case, 360 degrees has been something I've been targeted about. And I know they do say, you know, there's a call for, you know, brown and ethnic minority people and BAME people in workplaces. I sometimes think it's just something that they advertise, but they're not truly committed to. Because although I ended up getting over the line and getting a job with that financial services company, looking around me, I couldn't see that there was enough of an effort. So I was still the token brown Muslim girl. And if they were really committed to it and they had a quota, there would be more people that look like me or more people that came from the same backgrounds. So it's still very much a challenge. And a lot of companies are finding ways of trying to do it that's not performative and doesn't seem like a gimmick. But at the moment, I feel like they're really up against it because not enough is being done.
Yeah, I mean that's terrible in terms of it's we call them tick box exercises, but they just have to be done. And to think that everything you've done, or everything people have done in their lives, as long as they tick a box with a certain person in a certain office somewhere, then oh yeah, they'll do. To think that you can kind of belittle people like that is quite astonishing, really. So what do you do? I mean, is it the you do you and you just work your backside off and just do your thing? Or, is that the best way to kind of smash some of those barriers down and prove that, it doesn't matter your color, your gender, your, sexual orientation and things. You just work your backside off and prove them wrong. What do you say to that?
In all honesty, the people that I was working with didn't mean to make me feel like I stood out. Okay. It was coming from a place of ignorance. They were very nice, well-respected people. I'd go out with them on a general, work social, or I'd probably speak to them outside of work hours. They were genuinely very nice people. But what I'd find is they were brought up in very different environments and sheltered environments. They probably hadn't come across a Muslim person in the area that I worked in because it wasn't Birmingham. I was working in Stratford-upon-Avon then. That was where the head office was. So it was all very much, in terms of that landscape, it's predominantly white. They're only accustomed to white people. And when they do come in contact with someone who's not white, it's usually a tourist or someone who's on holiday checking out the sights in Stratford. So they don't really know what it means to be a non-white person in the workplace. So what I'd say is, to answer your question, how did I get around that? I knew that it was coming from a place of ignorance and they weren't being spiteful or they weren't being mean in any way. It's just they didn't know. So when I had fully cemented myself into the team, things like Eid, things like Ramadan would come around and I'd say, by all means, you might feel shy or have reservations about asking me these questions, but please, by all means, I am happy to be that person who answers your questions. If you want to know a bit more about Ramadan, if you want to know about Eid, if you want to know about why I'm praying, because I used to take prayer breaks at work. And that was quite uncommon because no one had asked for a prayer room before. No one took their lunch hour in 4 increments for prayer reasons, for instance. So I had like my own sort of arrangements at work and they were very sort of motivated to ask the questions, why do you do that? Because we once knew a Muslim who never prayed. We once knew a Muslim who never drank, who actually drank, and it was always the questions about, why did that Muslim do that? And you're a Muslim, but you're doing something else. Wow. It was a lot of pressure to be the poster girl for Islam or Pakistani culture or I don't know, whatever title you want to put on it. I had to be that person, but I was happy to be because I was the person saying, I can, if you have any questions about, because they'd always say diversity and inclusion, we're championing as many people as you can. If you want to be a champion, if you want to be an ambassador on a quarterly basis, there's always events around that. If you want to speak on things that are particularly close to home for you, I'd always sign myself up to things like that. And when I was trying to put questions out to the audience and engage with them, you could actually tell the people that I worked with genuinely didn't know anything about what it means to be BAME or from Birmingham, say. They always thought, we've never been to Birmingham, we only ever go there for Christmas shopping. I thought, blimey heck.
Yeah,
I've always lived in Birmingham.
That's bizarre, the things I've learned working where I do, it's just, I take it for granted a bit, but I just kind of know all this stuff and I can respect that and understand this and talk to people about certain things. But then, I do speak to some of my friends who teach in different areas and teach different students. And, the stories I tell, I'm like, what, really? Well, how do you know that? What, don't you know it? That's just common knowledge to me now. And it's great that, again, we help each other learn, don't we? You don't need to watch a TV show or read a web page about it. Just talk to people. And that seems to be a nice way to do it.
I mean, for me, I always felt like I had to work twice as hard to embed myself in those teams. So like they'd go clay pigeon shooting on the weekends, or they'd go for hikes in all these valleys and posh places, and I'd be like, where did you go to play golf? What was it like? We should do it sometime, trying to engage with them on a level that would suit them. Even though it was completely unknown territory for me. I don't know the first thing about golf. It's like my one blind spot when it comes to sport. So I'd be like, teach me about golf.
Of
Maybe
all
we
the
can go.
things, yeah, but one thing you don't know.
I know, yeah. And then they'd be like, oh, we're not football people. We much prefer rugby. And that's when it came to my attention that sport can be so class-based. Like you'd think, oh no, it's an equalizer, but it's really not. And well, I kind of got a bit of an indication into that at university. So my course mates were very much rugby people over football. So I'd always struggle with them in that capacity. But I thought, oh, it's probably just the schools they went to and the people they are. But then it kind of came through again at work. And, people who are much older than me were saying, yeah, we watch the Six Nations. We don't really watch the football. And so I had to make inroads to not overcompensate, but on the weekends I'd tune into the Six Nations or the rugby, and just to be able to have that conversation and to have those water cooler moments. And I think that helped bring me together in the networking space as well, that I knew a little about a lot, so I could have these conversations and kind of make inroads, because sometimes you have to get to know somebody on that level before you can start a working relationship, and that's what I tried to do.
Fascinating. You sound like me when I used to have to find out what happened in football, because unless it was American football, I didn't have a clue. So I'm like, okay, which team played here? Who was the score there? And thankfully, my father-in-law now is a Manchester City fan. So I know quite a lot about Manchester City, whether you like it or not. I actually know enough to kind of blag my way through a small talk conversation. So, I need to thank him for that.
Is he now a Manchester City fan, or has he always been?
Oh no, he's old school. He's like super mega old school. His story is that he saw them at their worst point in their lowest division, their lowest ever loss. So no, he's proper. Don't worry about that. He's fine.
Fair enough.
I'll sort you out another Zoom call with him. You can have a word. So, Umara, this has been such an awesome hour. I was just looked at my phone and I'm at 54 minutes. This is brilliant. I'm going to ask you one last question, man. One last question. So, if you could go back and tell yourself at 17, 18, one piece of advice that you wish you could follow, what would it be?
I would say trust your instinct. Despite what anyone and everyone else is telling you, I kid you not, you will have your best interests at heart, and trust that voice inside your head. Because although I thought I knew everything at 17, you don't know everything at 17, but you know yourself well enough to trust your judgment. And honestly, I had this, it was a judgment call for me at the end. Should I go to uni? Should I not go to uni? And it was an internal dialogue I was having with myself for a couple of months. But as soon as something lands on your table that you think, actually, that's speaking to me, and it ignites this fire in your belly, act upon it and go through with it. Because if you think something is right for you, despite what anybody else tells you, and however much people try to put you off, follow your instinct, because it's always right. In my case, it has been. And I genuinely think, believe in yourself and believe in your instinct. That would be mine.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, that saves me saying it, because they'll just think, oh, he's doing his spiel again. And look, he's got his promotional posters up and stuff, motivational posters. So, no, thank you for your honesty on that. And thank you so much for your insight here. I feel like we could do this for like another several hours. So I think we might have to do more, because this is brilliant. Yeah, this is brilliant. So what I'll do, I'll pause the recording. We'll say a quick cheerio after that. But all I'll say now is thank you so much. This is priceless information and advice and insight, for anybody watching this. So thank you so much. And we'll say,
what I will add, sorry,
go on. You tried to hit an hour. You got 3 minutes.
So for anybody who is watching this on the YouTube channel or by any other means, I am on Twitter, and as a fellow JC alumni, I would be happy to speak to anybody. If you have any career issues or anything with applications, if you want me to proofread anything, I am more than happy to help you, because I know the struggles, and I always was looking for like a mentor at that age. So I'm happy to help anybody, any students.
Do you want to shout out your Twitter handle?
You can.
Is that what the kids call it? Yeah, I can put it up.
You can put it at the bottom.
There you go. You do it. There you go.
So my Twitter handle is at yours truly, Umara. That's at yours truly, Umara, and he's going to put it over there. Yeah,
there you go. Oh, got to do editing now. I normally just upload it. Okay. No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And how kind is that? Not every day you get somebody willing, who's been there and done it. and still doing it, really, to offer advice and guidance. That's really kind of you. Thank you. Credit to you. So thanks. Cool. All right, let's say cheerio. I'll stop this up and we'll have a quick chat. But yeah, thank you so much. And appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
What could I possibly add to that? Amazing. Thank you so much, Umara, for giving your time to talk through such amazing life experiences and giving such just brilliant, stunning advice. I really hope that everybody takes it on board, and I think even I will be, to be perfectly honest with you. Just brilliant. Thank you. Really, really thank you. Have I said thank you enough? Thank you. And thanks to everybody else who's been watching. Really appreciate it as well. Feel free to keep saying hi on the social media channels, like, share, subscribe, and do all those good things. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you again on the next episode of Talking Business.